Shalom, family. Welcome to another teaching from Teo Ministries. The title of this teaching is The Location of Jerusalem in Namibia. I think not. This is a patrons-only presentation, so this is one of the benefits that you get for being a patron. You will get our opinion on some controversial teachings, things like that. You will get Teo's input, Teo's research. So, tell your friends, families, if they like our teachings and they want to get access to, exclusive tale studies concerning controversial things like the teaching by TruthUnveiled concerning the location of Jerusalem, patrons will be the ones to get it, because this presentation, which is Tale's opinion and research, will not be shared with the regular people. This is only a patron's teaching. So this is one of the benefits of becoming a patron. So let's get into this, because, I've been looking into the whole concept of, let's say, Jerusalem being in Africa. And, I've always felt that modern Jerusalem is not the true location of the biblical ancient Jerusalem. So, and I have come to a conclusion of where I believe Jerusalem truly is. And it's not too far from what they call Jerusalem today. And many of you have heard about it. And I'm not going to go through creating a video to prove that Jerusalem is the location, right? So let's continue. So, introduction. First off, let me say that we at Teo appreciate the work that Truth Unveiled did on Africa, because it sparked many of us to revisit the issue of the location of true Israel. And as I mentioned before, I've been looking at this myself for a while. Now, after looking into his teaching closer, we discovered that it is not possible for Namibia to be the land of Jerusalem. As a matter of fact, we do not even think that Kenya is a viable location for Jerusalem after completing our investigation. There are several problems I have with Jerusalem being in Namibia, specifically the Kalahari Desert. I've been looking into this matter for years as well. While looking, I investigated what we call the continent of Africa. The best places were near Kenya. However, Kenya does not work either because of many biblical identifiers are missing. I believe that what we call the continent of Africa is the biblical Eden. This will not be an exhaustive analysis, but enough to show that just because maps have biblical names does not mean they are biblical locations. The biggest issue with Truth Unveiled's maps. Truth Unveiled has relied on maps dating no later than the 1850s to prove his point where Jerusalem is located. It is easy to assume that the Dutch or Boers who came to South Africa named these territories after biblical names. Because remember, a lot of these people, even though they killed a bunch of people, considered themselves Christian. So they identified with Christian names, wanted to name Christian locations. So it is like many of our city streets today in the USA being named like, Hebron. In many places within the U.S., you might have a street called Hebron. If let's say 200 years from now, someone were to look at our maps and find, a street called Hebron, they can make the case like Truth is and say, well, this is where Jerusalem was. No, just because there's a name called Hebron don't mean that's where Jerusalem was, right? So if someone took a few of our maps a day, they would say Jerusalem and many biblical places were in the U.S. To rely on maps created by the Dutch who came to South Africa in 1652 is a mistake. Also, to take other maps that have other biblical names but does not have Jerusalem on those maps is a mistake as well, although they may be older than 1850. There must be historical reliability for those areas being named correctly. Example, the Duke of Orleans maps showing where Judah was located in the continent of Africa was first created by people like Idrisi, a Muslim scholar who interacted with the Hebrews. However, the maps that Truth Unveiled used were created by Americans, Europeans, and others who probably never interacted with the Hebrew Israelite culture. There's no documented information indicating that these Europeans had any knowledge of this area and that this area was truly being tied to the biblical land of Israel. Now, one of the maps that you're going to see was created by George B. Bacon, an American map maker from 1830 to 1922. So you will see all of these maps, and I'm not going to show all of the maps that Truth had in his videos, but these maps that show Jerusalem were no earlier, no earlier than 1850s. I think all of the ones that had Jerusalem on it, the oldest map probably was like 1856 or something like that, right? So an example of cities with biblical names in the U.S., right? Antioch, Bethany, Bethel, Bethlehem, Bethpage, Lebanon, Nazareth. I mean, if someone came and saw this, what would they say? 200 years from now. Oh, this is where Jerusalem was. No, you cannot do that. This is what Truth is doing, which is really bad scholarship, but we have to understand that you cannot just rely on the maps. You have to use the scriptures as well, and mainly use the scriptures to prove your point, right? So South Africa, notice that the location of these biblically named areas is in the south only. The location where the Dutch and British settled, mostly on the 1850s and older maps. So see right here, we see Jerusalem, right? All of these maps that show Jerusalem were 1850 or later. So mixing of maps. The mixing of maps from different creators that do not back up the location and names is a problem. You cannot do good research and take one map from 1561 that shows Galilee in Africa, and then take another map from the 1886 that has Jerusalem in Africa, and say that this proves your point that it all was in West or Southern Africa. Why not use modern maps as well if we're going to do this, right? Why not? You do not want to use modern maps because they are not reliable sources of information, especially since you know that your enemy is trying to hide the truth from you. So this is a bad comparison. The A.J. Johnson 1886 map and the Girolamo Rosselli 1561 map. Okay, so what Truth did, he says, okay, see the A.J. Johnson map? It has Jerusalem, and that's in Africa. And then he says, oh, see the Rosselli map, 1561? That's an older map, and it has Galilee, and that's Galilee, right? But it doesn't have Jerusalem. Okay, now, so what's the point he's making that, okay, you got a biblical name in the older map, let me say this, a possible biblical name called Galilee, right? In the older map, but then in the more modern map, which is 1886, you have Jerusalem. But yet the older map does not have Jerusalem in it, right? It doesn't have Jerusalem in it, nor does it have Jerusalem in that location. So how can you say that, okay, the 1886 map, since it's in Africa, shows that Jerusalem was in Africa, and then we got Galilee, which we don't even know if it's Galilee, but we have that on the map, and so therefore that shows us this is the biblical area. No, you can't do that. You just can't do that. That's not good research. There's a lot of assumptions being made here. And see, this is the problem with a lot of people, is that they don't, even when they study the scriptures, it's not line upon line, not precept upon precept, not here a little, there a little. So you got to be careful. So the Kenya question, because remember I told you I was looking at Kenya as a possible area, and I saw some good stuff, but that didn't work either. So after further research, I do not believe that Mount Kenya is Mount Zion either, because in the scriptures, Mount Zion was always associated with Jerusalem. Jerusalem is supposed to be uninhabited right now and desolate. Mount Kenya has people living on it, people whom many refer to as Hebrew Israelites. Now, in 2 Samuel chapter 5, verses 6 through 7, we see, and I'm going to read the scripture right now, verse 6. The king and his men marched to Jerusalem to attack the Jebusites who lived there. The Jebusites said to David, you will not get in here. Even the blind and the lame can ward you off, they thought. David cannot get in here. Nevertheless, David captured the fortress of Zion, which is the city of David. So we see throughout the scriptures that Mount Zion is associated with the city of David. We find that the city of David is Jerusalem. Okay, so therefore Kenya cannot. be Jerusalem. So I abandoned that idea. So what do we need to do? What do we need to do to determine where Jerusalem is? Since we do not know where Jerusalem truly is, we have to let the Bible describe the location and compare what we know with the Bible. Just like anything else, the Bible should be our source. It should be our foundation. After doing much research, I can tell you where I believe Jerusalem is. I believe that Jerusalem is in Tel Arad. So Tel Arad is located right here at the south end of the Dead Sea, right? So there are brothers already who have already done this research on this topic of Tel Arad being the true location of Jerusalem. So I will not go into it again. I'm not going to research it. They have done a tremendous job of pointing out why Tel Arad is the location of Jerusalem. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to discuss some scriptures that validates this, right? That validates that Jerusalem is the location of Tel Arad. So this is the area that we're going to go to. So what else is Namibia missing? 1. Notice that there is no Sea of Galilee anywhere inside of Namibia. 2. Notice that there is no place that could be identified as Mount Zion in Namibia. 3. Notice that Jerusalem is not surrounded by mountains according to Psalms 125 verses 1 through 5, which states, "As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people both now and forevermore." No place nearby also where Hebrews would cross anything like the Red Sea. So when the Exodus occurred, right, we know that our ancestors had to cross the Red Sea to get to the Promised Land, right? If it's in Namibia, where's the Red Sea? Where's the body of water that you had to cross to get there? There is none. That nixes that whole idea. So the boundary of Judah. In Joshua chapter 15, there was an allotment of land to Judah. Let's read that. The allotment for the tribe of Judah, according to its clans, extended down to the territory of Edom to the desert of Zin in the extreme south. Their southern boundary started from the bay at the southern end of the Dead Sea, crossed south of Scorpion Pass, continued on to Zin, and went over to the south of Kadesh Barnea. Then it ran past Hezron up to Adar and curved around to Karka. It then passed along to Asmon and joined to Wadi of Egypt, which is the river of Egypt, ending at the Mediterranean Sea. This is their southern boundary. The eastern boundary is the Dead Sea as far as the mouth of the Jordan. So, what did we get from this scripture? We know for a fact that part of the territory that was allocated to Judah goes up to the river of Egypt. So we know that Egypt is within its boundary. Is Namibia anywhere near Egypt? Nope, I don't think so. Even if you can find a salt sea or salt lake or whatever near Namibia, you don't have Egypt nearby to be that basically creates the parameters for where Judah lives. Not only that, it shows that their southern boundary started from the bay at the southern end of the Dead Sea. So this is where their territory, where Judah's territory started. Not only that, it is at the Mediterranean Sea. So that means you have to go up to the Mediterranean Sea. Now you can look at the King James Version and it's just going to say something like the Great Sea or the Sea or whatever. Right? But if you look at the territory that we're talking about and where Egypt is and all of this, right, we know that it has to be the Mediterranean Sea because that's what's near Egypt, especially based upon where the Nile River is leading up, right, to the Mediterranean Sea, right? So this gives us our boundaries that we're forced to work with. You can forget all of that West Africa stuff in South Africa. It don't work with the scriptures. So here what we see, okay, right here on the right side where that little dash line is, right? So right over this area, okay, and we see that little lip down here by the Red Sea is where Arabia is, and further up there we know where Israel is. So that border, it said, goes all the way to the Nile River, which is the river of Egypt, right? And then his borders goes all the way up to the Mediterranean Sea. right? If that's the case, nix Namibia, nix Kenya, right? Nix South Africa. It don't fit. So comparisons. We saw in Joshua 15, it stated that their southern boundary started from the bay at the southern end of the Dead Sea. Look at this map of Telerad. Where is that? At the southern end of the Dead Sea. Right? Not the fake Jerusalem at the top, which is at the top of the Dead Sea. We see here from Joshua 15 that their southern boundary started. It began from the bay at the southern end of the Dead Sea. So Telerad is the location. Right? Modern Jerusalem, look at where modern Jerusalem is. At the top end of the Dead Sea. That can't be it. Right? So this is what we need to do to find out where Jerusalem is. And, we all knew that there was something wrong with the modern day Jerusalem. We all knew that, but we couldn't figure it out. But all we had to do, just like with myself, had to spend more time in the Word. And, I thank Truth for kicking this off because it made me spend some more time in the Word so that I can look and say, okay, what does the Bible say? So Telerad is the only area at the southern part of the Dead Sea that meets the criteria. Telerad has to be the true location of Jerusalem. Joshua 15 verse 8 talks about the Jebusites. And the border went up by the valley of the son of Hinnom unto the south side of the Jebusite. The same is Jerusalem. So where Jebusites were camped, where they were located, is where Jerusalem was. And the border went up to the top of the mountain that lies before the valley of Hinnom westward, which is at the end of the valley of the giants northward. So here we can prove that Jebus, right, where the Jebusites lived, is the same as Jerusalem. So here's what they did on these maps. You see, they moved the Jebusites' territory at the top of the Dead Sea, where modern Jerusalem is. And as I showed you, Joshua 15 shows that Judah's territory, which is where Jerusalem was located, was it began at the southern end of the Dead Sea. So what they did, they moved Jerusalem further north. Jerusalem and the location of the Jebusites should be at the southern tip, where Telerad is located. See, they have Judah on the map on the right-hand side further up. And they have Jebus further up at the top. That is incorrect according to Joshua 15. Joshua 15 says Judah's territory was at the southern end of the Dead Sea. So Judah lived among the Jebusites. We saw that Judah lived near the Dead Sea or Salt Sea. We also saw that Judah's territory went up to the rivers of Egypt, aka the Nile, up toward the Mediterranean Sea. Below we see that Judah lived with the Jebusites in Jerusalem. So Joshua 15 verse 63. Judah could not dislodge the Jebusites who were living in Jerusalem. To this day the Jebusites lived there with the people of Judah. So we see that the Jebusites lived there with the people of Judah. The same territory. So Jebus is the same place that Jerusalem is. Right? Once again, they got Jebusites at the top of the Dead Sea. We saw the scripture in Joshua that says that Judah's territory began at the southernmost tip of the Dead Sea. So therefore we know that Judah's territory included Jerusalem, and therefore Jerusalem had to be further south by Telerad. So I personally believe that what we call Africa is Eden. East of Eden was land promised to the first man, Adam. East of Eden, promised land, is the Garden of Eden. It's one and the same. The promised land is the same as the Garden of Eden. Yah gave the land of Canaan to Jacob and his descendants and called it the promised land. We see both were promised to Yah's children. So is the Garden of Eden also the promised land given to Israel? It just so happened that Canaan is east of Eden. or Africa. And the Garden of Eden is east of Eden, Africa. Genesis 2, verse 8. And the Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the man whom he had formed. So the garden was east of Eden. So if the garden is towards the east, and we know that Judah's territory went up to Egypt, and we know where Egypt is, and we know where the Red Sea is, right? Then Eden has to be west of the garden. East of Eden, Africa, Jubilees 8. And he knew that the Garden of Eden is the Holy of Holies, and the dwelling of the Lord, and Mount Sinai, the center of the desert, and Mount Zion, the center of the navel of the earth. These three were created as holy places facing each other. So, what do we know here? Okay, we know that the Garden of Eden is the Holy of Holies. Now, when the temple was built, the temple had a Holy of Holies. Where was that located? In Jerusalem. Right? Where's Jerusalem located? Right? Near the Dead Sea. Right? It's east of Eden. Same as the Garden of Eden. It is east of Eden. Is that a coincidence? So we're going to read Jubilees. This is Jubilees chapter 8, verses 12 through 15. And there came forth on the writing of Shem's lot the middle of the earth, which he should take as an inheritance for himself and for his sons for the generations of eternity. From the middle of the mountain range of Rapha, from the mount of the water from the river Tina. And his portion goes towards the west through the midst of this river, and it extends till it reaches the water of the abyss, out of which this river goes forth and pours into the waters into the sea Mead. And this river flows into the great sea. And all that is towards the north is Japheth's, and all that is towards the south belongs to Shem. So we know where Japheth's territory is, right? And if you go read the rest of chapter 8 with Jubilees, it talks about how Japheth's area is cold, Ham's area is hot, and Shem's area is sort of in between. Okay? So we know that Japheth's territory is cold. We know where Japheth is located. That's the Europeans. Let's continue. And it extends till it reaches Carousel. This is the bosom of the tongue which looks towards the south. So this is talking about that little tongue area, which is where Arabia is, right? Looks like a tongue, right? That's what it looks like to me. What does it look like to you? And we know that's part of Shem's territory. And his portion extends along the great sea, and it extends in a straight line till it reaches the west of the tongue, which looks towards the south. For this sea is named the tongue of the Egyptian sea, right? Near Egypt again. And it turns from here towards the south, towards the mouth of the great sea on the shore of its waters, and it extends to the west to Afra. And Afra is Africa. And I'm going to show you why I believe that Afra is Africa. Because, as we just stated, right, that Eden is west of the garden, because the garden is east of Eden, right? So therefore, west to Afra has to be Eden, right? But we're going to continue on, and I'm going to show you another reason why Afra is Africa. And it extends till it reaches the waters of the river Gihon, and to the south of the waters of Gihon, to the rivers of this, to the banks of this river. So here, this is from Josephus. This is what Josephus says. Abraham, after he married Keturah, by whom 6 sons were born to him, men of courage and of sagacious minds, Zambran and Jazar and Madian and Joshbak and Sus. Now the sons of Sus were Sabathan and Dabat and Dedan. The sons of Dedan were Latsusim and Ashur and Rum. The sons of Midal were Ephus and Ophrin and Anak and Abidas and Eldas. Now for all these sons and grandsons, Abraham contrived to settle them in colonies, and they took possession of Troglodytis and the country of Arabia, the Happy, as far as it reaches to the Red Sea. So remember where Arabia is, what that little tongue we saw in Jubilees that goes down, and it's by the Red Sea, and the Red Sea goes into the deeper ocean. It is related of this orphan that he made war against Libya and took it, and that his grandchildren, when they inhabited it, called it from his name, Africa. And indeed, Alexander Polyhistor gives his attestation to what I here say, who speaks thus. Cleodemus the prophet, who was called Malchus, who wrote a history of the Jews in agreement with the history of Moses, their legislator, relates that there were many sons born to Abraham by Keturah. Nay, he names three of them, Apher and Surim and Japhran. That from Surim was the land of Assyria denominated or named, and that from the other two, Apher and Jabran, the country of Africa took its name, because these men were auxiliaries to Hercules when he fought against Libya and Antiochus, and that Hercules married Apher's daughter, and her he begat a son, Diodorus, and that Sophon was his son, from whom that barbarous people called Sephaeans were denominated. So here we see that Africa was named after Apher and Jabran. Now, Apher, when you go and look at what we call, the canon, which is 66 books, is Epher, right? And Epher is one of the grandsons of Abraham. So Apher is really one of the grandsons, and that Africa was named after him, Apher. And remember, we saw that Afra is what Jubilee is called, the Afra, right? So let's continue verses 16 to 21. And it extends towards the east till it reaches the Garden of Eden, to the south thereof, to the south, and from the east of the whole land of Eden, and of the whole east. It turns to the east and proceeds till it reaches the east of the mountain named Rapha, and it descends to the bank of the mount of the river Tina. This portion came forth by lot for Shem and his sons, that they should possess it forever unto his generations forevermore. And Noah rejoiced that his portion came forth for Shem and for his sons, and he remembered all that he spoke with his mouth in prophecy, for he had said, Blessed be the Lord God of Shem, and may the Lord dwell in the dwelling of Shem. And he knew that the Garden of Eden is the Holy of Holies, and the dwelling of the Lord, and Mount Sinai in the center of the desert, and Mount Zion, the center of the navel of the earth. These three were created as holy places facing each other. So which three was created as holy places? The Garden of Eden, right? Mount Sinai and Mount Zion. Now we know that the garden does not exist anymore, right? But we do see that the Most High, Father Yah, dwells in the dwelling of Shem. And we see that, where's the territory of Shem, right? Jerusalem, right? The Garden of Eden is east of Eden, right? That's Shem's territory. So let's continue. And he knew that a blessed portion and a blessing had come to Shem and his sons and to the generations forever. The whole land of Eden, and the whole land of the Red Sea, and the whole land of the east of India, and on the Red Sea, and the mountain thereof, and all the land of Bashan, and all the land of Lebanon, and the islands of Kafir, and all the mountains of Sinir, and Amana, and the mountains of Ashur in the north, and all the land of Elam, right? Elam, that's in Iran, Ashur, and Babel, and Susan, and Madai, and all the mountains of Ararat, and all the region beyond the sea, which is beyond the mountains of Ashur toward the north, a blessed and spacious land. And all that is in it is very good. So all of that is Shem's territory, right? So good thing is, now we know why our people ran into West Africa. Because they ran into Shem's territory in West Africa. That was their people's land, which is why they went back home. They went back to grandmother's house or grandfather's house, right? That's what you would expect. So, the three holy places. Now, it has been proven, at least to my satisfaction, and you all could go do the research, that Jabal el-Lawz is the real Mount Sinai, which is located in Saudi Arabia. Now, in Galatians chapter 4, verse 25, it says, For this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, and corresponds to Jerusalem, which now is. Okay, Jubilees 8 says Mount Sinai is the center of the desert. Look at what Jabal el-Lawz is, right? It's in Arabia. Okay. Now, if you go do your research, you will see that there's some very strong reasons to believe that Jabal el-Lawz is where Mount Sinai is located. I mean, it's almost indisputable. Okay. Now, look at the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden no longer exists, but Telerad does, right? Telerad, in my opinion, is where Jerusalem is, okay? And I believe that this may be Mount Zion. So these three were created as holy places facing each other. So on the map on the left, Jabal al-Lawz, which is Mount Sinai, is directly facing Jerusalem. Now, this goes to the fake Jerusalem, but remember, Tel Arad is on that same path, that same northern path. Okay? So, once again, the biblical descriptions are fitting the territory where modern Jerusalem is. It's just that modern Jerusalem is not Jerusalem. Tel Arad is, in my opinion. I think it is absolutely of a high probability that it is. And I think you all should go watch the videos dealing with Tel Arad being that location. I mean, they make some very good points. There's strong reasons of why Tel Arad is where Jerusalem is located. And then these scriptures are lining up, right? The scriptures are lining up. And if you look at it as well as Tel Arad is surrounded by mountains and it's desolate. So west of the Holy of Holies. So if the Holy of Holies is east of Eden, and we know that the Holy of Holies was in Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is where Judah resides, near the Dead Sea, then west of the Holy of Holies, or west of Jerusalem, is Africa, right? We know that. So therefore, Africa is Eden. I think that's a no-brainer. So Mary and Joseph flee to Egypt. Matthew chapter 2, verses 13 to 15. And when they were departed, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, Arise, and take the young child and his mother, and flee into Egypt. And be thou there until I bring thee word, for Herod will seek the young child to destroy him. When he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night, and departed into Egypt, and was there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken of the Lord by the prophet, saying, Out of Egypt have I called my son. So, Mary and Joseph fled to Egypt. My question to you is, do you think that Mary and Joseph fled from Egypt, which we know where Egypt is, to Namibia? Do you think he fled from Namibia, that is, to Egypt, which is almost 4,000 miles from Namibia to Egypt, or from the Kalahari Desert to Egypt? Do you really believe that Mary and Joseph and the Messiah went 4,000 miles? This is the area from Namibia to Egypt, which is 3,534 miles. I don't think so. Or did Mary and Joseph and the Most High, Yah, in human flesh, which is Yahusha, Jesus, did they flee from Tel Arad to Egypt? 403 miles. That makes sense, right? That makes more sense. That's something somebody can do. I mean, even if you was in a caravan, it would take you forever to get across those hills and mountains and jungles and all that stuff to make it from Namibia to Egypt. But they can make this track. Come on. So how far did they walk? Did Mary and Joseph walk 3,534 miles or 403 miles? Which is more logical? So Truth Unveiled's research. I talked to Truth Unveiled in email about my Kenya findings, which I have abandoned after further research. This study is my final conclusion. So I no longer think Kenya is where Mount Zion is. I don't buy into it. It don't fit the scriptures. No. Okay? Emphasize that. I believe Tel Arad is. I am glad that Truth Unveiled brought this to our attention and forced me to go even deeper than I did in the past. I've been looking into this for some time now and believe the promised land is near Tel Arad. Right? Or is Tel Arad. Everyone can believe what they like, but this is closer to what the scriptures describe concerning Jerusalem and the promised land. And the scriptures give you the boundaries. The scriptures give you the boundaries. So now, unless you're saying to me that Egypt is no longer Egypt and Egypt is not the legitimate location of ancient Egypt, or that the Red Sea is not the Red Sea, and that the Mediterranean, is not the Mediterranean, or that deep sea that they're talking about. I mean, you got a whole bunch of other problems, right? Because then you got to find those locations because they don't exist. Because even if you go into Africa somewhere, and you try to make that fit, it don't fit. So the territory that is where modern Jerusalem is the correct territory. Jerusalem is not Jerusalem. So this is what I see, family. I thank you for listening. Many of you asked me my opinion on Truth Unveiled's research about the location of Jerusalem in Namibia. As you can tell, I disagree with that. I don't think he has any valid foundation for it. I enjoyed looking at the video because it made me think. But remember, the people who were there considered themselves Christians, right? Even though they killed our people and took the land and murdered and raped and did all these things. You know how they are, right? But they called themselves Christians, so they would name those territories after Christian names, just like we mentioned America has done. So in America, robbed, murdered, killed, raped, tortured our people as well. So, just for the fact that they call themselves Christians don't mean they're Christians. Just because I'm a car and I sit in just because there's a car in my garage and I sit in the garage by my car does not make me a car, right? Even if I say I'm a car, I'm not a car. You can call yourself what you want. So point being is, the naming of those areas is because they call themselves Christians, just like they've done in America, right? They call it Hebron. They as you saw the list, they came up with that, which is why it was curious to me that the only maps you can see with Jerusalem in it was only from 1850 onward. That didn't make sense to me because I've been studying this for a while, and all of the older maps I saw always pointed to where Jerusalem is today. Always pointed. Now, they weren't accurate maps. They were, positional maps, right? So, Tel-Arad is so close to what we call modern Jerusalem. I mean, it fits in that path or, where they say. So I'm convinced that Tel-Arad is the location. You may not be, but this is Teo's opinion. And I thank you for your time. And if you enjoyed this research, reach out to your friends, ask them to help us out so that, we can do this full time and, reveal some more truths and give you a solid foundation, give you solid teachings and studies and not be deceived because, there's a lot of these people out here who are deceiving everybody, and a lot of our people are gullible as heck. I'm sorry. But God always give you a sound voice and truth, right? He says he's going to give you people, pastors after his own heart. Now, I ain't calling myself no pastor. I'm a teacher. But anyway, and I don't want to be a pastor. I'll do whatever the Most High want me to do. But anyway, I thank you for listening. I love you all with the love of the Messiah. Shalom, family. Your captivity is coming to an end.